This is practice midterm 2, problems 37 through 45. And the questions are, indicate if the compound is A, soluble in water, B, insoluble in water. So this is just a straight up application of the solubility rules. And those which you've all got burned into your brains by now. Number 37 is ammonium carbonate. Rule number 1, all ammonium salts are soluble. So we know, I don't care what the carbonate is, what the anion is. So this is an A for 37. Now, number 38, silver chloride. Well, I've got no rule for silver, but I have a rule for chloride. Chlorides are mostly soluble, the exception being in the presence of silver plus 1 salts, lead plus 2, or mercurous ion. And in this case, we know it's insoluble, so that would be a B on the Scantron, and write it on the test as well. Okay. 39, I've got potassium sulfate. Well, rule number 1 tells me that all sodium, potassium, lithium, sodium, potassium salts are soluble. So I know it's got to be soluble. And then I can look at sulfates. The sulfates are soluble anyway, except for the few exceptions, which would be calcium, strontium, through barium, but we'll get to that in a little while. This is going to be by default. Rule number 1 has precedent over everything, so this is soluble, A. Now, number 40, strontium sulfate. I don't have a hard, fast rule for strontium, but I have a rule for sulfate. Sulfates are usually soluble, the exceptions being calcium, strontium, and barium are insoluble. In this case, strontium is one of them. So it's in the exception column. This is going to be insoluble. That's option B. So, yeah, write a B in the bubble on the Scantron, put a B, a hard copy on the test. Now, number 41. I've got copper sulfate. I don't have a rule for copper, but I do have a rule for sulfate. Most sulfate salts are soluble, the exceptions being calcium, strontium, and barium. And so copper's not that. So we will, this is going to be soluble. So this is going to be an A. Now, number 42, barium nitrate. Well, rule number 1, all nitrates are soluble. It doesn't matter what this is. We're done. That would be an A. It is soluble in water. So, number 43 is silver hydroxide. I don't have a rule for silver, but I have one for hydroxides. Hydroxides are insoluble. The exception being rule number 1, sodium, potassium, and lithium, and ammonium salts. And the other exception being calcium, strontium, and barium again. Those hydroxides are soluble. Well, silver isn't one of those, so that means it's insoluble. So this is B. Insoluble. Now I've got number 44, sodium sulfides. Well, it don't matter what's on the other end of this, sodium salts are soluble. Rule number 1. That's in fact one of the few ways I can get sulfides to go into solution, is it has to have either ammonium, sodium, potassium, or lithium here, or it's not going to go in. I could probably get it in with calcium, strontium, and barium as well. That's the other exception. But this is sodium. So it's going to be soluble. We already answered the question. A. Soluble. The last in our problems in this series is barium hydroxide. Again, I don't have a rule for barium, but I do have a rule for hydroxides. Hydroxides are insoluble, except in group 1A, sodium, potassium, lithium, and ammonium salts, and the exception being calcium, strontium, and barium. So this is one of the exceptions. Barium falls in the exceptions, so that would be A. It's soluble. And that completes that series.